We will talk now about the Ballycarry and Islandmagee projects, and we'll just give you an update of where we've got to. So first, why is our society doing geographical DNA projects? Well, it's really about getting people to test who wouldn't otherwise test, and really building up a series of results for people who are in the DNA databases, so as we can then establish and have points of comparison for other people around the world that are part of different families, that can then look at our results and maybe get an idea of where their Irish ancestors came from and find a link back to a specific place. It's also to help us to get back through that 1800 brick wall into the 1700s, because DNA is allowing us to do that, and it's allowing us to confirm those connections further back into the 1700s. It also gives us an idea of just showing us how DNA is working alongside genealogy to give us additional links. So what you might get is you might get a different name or a new record or a match to a specific place through DNA. And that gets you thinking slightly differently. And then you go back to the genealogy and you then start to put weight onto a document or something, or some record that you had previously ignored. And you can then see through your DNA that this is significant. You start to put on the right weight to it, and then you can find and extend your family tree. So that's a really good way to work alongside your family tree with DNA. But it does require you to have a number of DNA tests in a specific family or in a specific place. But local DNA projects are bringing out this type of information because we're able to test widely, and we're finding people in an area who are distantly related to each other who don't know it. So they think they're in separate families. They don't know they're related, but then they start to find links between them. And then we can try to establish what line of their family they're linking on, and then find records to link those together. And that obviously leads into an increased sense of connection within a community, where we can help others to identify that their ancestors came from there. And obviously then within a group that people are finding out that they're connected to each other. So that's why we believe that local geographical projects are very important. So far our society has been doing our society projects in Ballycarry and then extended into the neighbouring area of Islandmagee. We then started to do a local project within Newtonabbey branch on Ballyeaston, and that was on a church census. Then the Belfast branch took on another project there in the city cemetery, and now Killyleagh branch has taken on a project in Killyleagh as well. And we're hoping that other branches are going to adopt this approach as well, and that they are also going to focus on other areas of the north of Ireland and help us to extend our DNA reach, and also to really start to mesh everything together. Because although we're doing very well in Northern Ireland, there's still obviously a way to go, and we can still make more progress, and that's what we're aiming to do. So I'm just going to be talking now just about our Ballycarry and Islandmagee ones. So we're not focusing here on Ballyeaston or the city cemetery or Killyleagh. So this is what we've achieved so far. We have got 119 tests that we have funded through our society. And of these 119 tests, we've got results back so far for 109 people. Based on those 109 people that we have got results back for, we had found 506 confirmed matches in May 2022. So that's 2 years ago. Now you can see how that's risen from 506 to 1,200 in just 2 years. And that's because we're finding more links, and we're finding better links that are helping us to find connections between people within the area that we're looking at, but also more widely in the database. Because we're finding people that maybe have one line from Islandmagee or one line from Ballycarry, and their ancestors emigrated maybe in the 1850s. They went to a particular part of the world, but obviously they took some of their family's DNA with them, and that's still traceable through a DNA test. So as well as that, we're linking in to other people who have paid for their own tests and are just in the database. So for example, in the Islandmagee project, we currently have 204 people in our project, even though we have funded only 119 tests. And not all of those 119 people are in the Islandmagee project, because some of them are applicable to Ballycarry only. But we're finding new connections. It's also helping us to find new documentation as well. And we're going to be touching on that in a minute or two. And of course, we are publishing our research on WikiTree. So everything that we're uncovering and linking together and using DNA to bring things together, all of that is being produced and published on WikiTree. So just a little bit more about what we've achieved in a different format here. So of the 1,200 confirmed matches, this is the levels of which these matches have been found at. Now, I don't want you to look at all of these because it's not really going to mean much to you, but this is basically a list of all of the relationships that we have found between people in these 1,200 matches. And what I want to really focus you on is that the numbers over here are the closer connections. That is not what we are focusing on. We don't really need to be funding people's DNA tests to find out that they're first cousins of each other. We're naturally finding these matches because they are matching other people in the database. But we're not really looking for those ones. What we're looking for in a geographical project is further out matches. So these are matches beyond third cousins. So it's the ones over on the right-hand side of this table. That's what we're trying to find, because those are the matches further back that a lot of people won't know that they have. The other thing that we're finding in Ballycarry and Islandmagee, we're finding that people may be related in more than one way. And this always happens in a group. And what you would find is that there's ways of looking at the DNA, and we can very quickly detect if someone has got a double or maybe even a triple connection to another person. Where there was a double or a triple connection, we didn't want to count these more than once. So what I have done when I've been apportioning these relationships, I have always picked the closest relationship. So I am understating our effectiveness here, because somebody may be a third cousin through one connection, but they're also a fourth cousin once removed and a fifth cousin to the same person through a different family line. And we're only counting this for the strongest connection, so the closest one. So there's plenty of fourth and fifth cousins that aren't even shown here because we didn't want to double count. So what I just want to show you here is when we're looking at fourth cousins, we have found 210 fourth cousin relationships. And as I said, that's a minimum because it's not including people that are multiply related. But we've also found 55 fifth cousins. Now, I don't know in your research, but in Northern Ireland, finding and proving a fifth cousin on DNA is quite hard to do because, number one, we don't have family trees that go back far enough to bring us back to a common ancestor and bring us back down to a fifth cousin. And to get beyond a fifth cousin becomes harder and harder. So I must say I am very pleased to see that the numbers are being pushed up towards the top of this table. And I'm hoping that this time next year, we're going to have more fifth cousins, even more sixth cousins, and that we're going to be pushing the boundaries of known information, and that we're going to be able to get further with all of the connections between people in both Ballycarry and Islandmagee. And this is why we envisaged this as a long-term project. So we knew that we had to take it step by step. And as we get more DNA information, and as we find additional links between families, we're able to push the boundaries of this and just take it that wee bit further. So that's what we're aiming to do at the moment. Okay, so just to give you a very quick example of where our approach has worked here. And what we had here in this example, we had a particular person called Samuel Hill Bradford, and we had him tested. And he was born in 1810 and died in 1892. And what we had was we had him at the top of the tree because he married in the 1830s, long before certification. We didn't have any record of who his parents were. But then we came across somebody on his DNA match list. And this was somebody in another country. And what this led to was it led us to the discovery of the partially burnt will book for Connor, which dates back to 1818. And in that book, there was 357 partial wills. Now, what I mean by partial wills is that this book was in the Four Courts in Dublin when it was burnt. And part of the book was burnt and part of it has survived. So in the 1950s or 60s, somebody took the remains of this book and they copied it out manually into another book. And they put little dots in where information was missing on the burnt sections of the book. And what we found in this book was we found the will of Jane Brennan. Now, what we found was that this connected back to Samuel Hill Bradford because she was his maternal grandmother. So this is giving us the family tree of someone who was born in 1733 in the Islandmagee area. But the really interesting thing is that Samuel Hill Bradford, as far as we could get him back, he lived in Craigenee in the neighbouring parish of Glyn. He had no connection to Temple Corran, where Ballycarry is. He had no connection to Islandmagee. And now we have that connection because we can now look at that record with different significance. And we have now found the link between Islandmagee and the Bradford family that 2 generations later had moved to Glyn. So we now have the parents and the grandparents for Samuel Hill Bradford. And because some of the family emigrated, we're able to look at the Australian marriage and death certificates, and they give us parents' names, which give us additional links to this particular family. And DNA is cementing all of this together. So this is the little tree. This is the actual copy of the will. I'll show you the tree in a second. So this is just showing you a little copy of what survives in the will book. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but this is what we were dealing with. So it says, in the name of God, and then just A, and then there's the dots where that bit's missing. But when you start to look through this, you can start to get information about my son-in-law, William Bell, for example. So, and then my son-in-law, John McGowan. So all of these names are mentioned in there, and you can use that information and draw it up into a little family tree. And this is what we have produced. So this is Jane Brennan, who died in 1818. And we know from the will that she was married to James Hill. Now that led us to a gravestone, which was in Islandmagee, that we couldn't previously link to anyone else in this tree. And on that gravestone, we got the precise dates of death, and we also got their ages. So we could use their ages to calculate an approximate date of birth. And then here is Samuel Hill Bradford. And we were able then to establish that his parents were Hugh Bradford and Fanny Hill. And that's where he gets that middle name. And obviously, that could be something that we would have surmised, that the middle name comes from the mother's maiden name. But in other examples, it may be the name of an uncle or a grandmother or a maternal grandfather. So you don't really know where that name comes, but now we have got proof that it actually came from the mother's maiden name. We also have Jane's maiden name because that was mentioned in her will. So now we were able to look at the will and get all of her children. So she had a son, James. She had a daughter, Ellen, who married John McGowan, a daughter, Betty, a daughter, Sarah, a daughter, Belle, who married somebody called Brown, but we haven't been able to get any further there yet. Then we have Fanny, who married Hugh Bradford, and we have another unnamed daughter who married James McMaster. Now, there is potential that in the future, we will be able to link a McMaster family up here. And DNA is a methodology for us to put all of this together. And again, we may find a Brown family that fits beneath this unknown man called Brown and his wife, who was Bell Hill. So now we've got a little bit of information that we can continue to build this particular family up. So we're putting all the pieces of the jigsaw together using DNA results and using records such as gravestone inscriptions and these partially burnt wills as well. And what we've also found is that we have 3 DNA matches. So we have one DNA match here that's coming down through Ellen Hill. So it's coming from James and Jane down through Ellen to James and then down to his children. And this line takes us to Ballycarry. This line here is taking us to Glyn. And this line down here is taking us to Queensland in Australia. So we have found different DNA matches beneath these 3 points that all connect. And we have now found documentary evidence that connects all sections together. So it gives us a reason for why these people appear on each other's match list. And we continue to grow this example. That's just one of the families that we have been looking at. But I thought it might be an easy one to explain to you how we are at the forefront of new knowledge, because all of these records survive, but they're not currently linked together. And that is what we are going to produce. And we're going to produce this information in the Wikitree format. And Anne is just going to talk to that now. So Anne, I'll pass over to you now.
Right, well, as Martin says, we are publishing all of the information on Wikitree. And the advantage of Wikitree is that it is this one world family tree. So the idea is that all the trees are interconnected. So it's not like, say, Ancestry, where everyone has their own separate accounts and their trees in those accounts. And there may be duplication between trees in the various accounts. In Wikitree, they're all interconnected. And this is really ideal for us in the DNA projects that we've been talking about. And also then it is able to show the complex connections. So as Martin explains, there may be connections between 2 people on different lines, and these can be seen on Wikitree. Also, the fact that it is freely accessible, it doesn't cost anyone anything to join, and so it means that we can get, not only is it good for the members of the projects, but it means that people are coming to us that have used, for example, Google to search for particular names, and then they found those names on our Wikitree pages, and they've made contact with us. So it's really good for what I would call kind of tester bait. In other words, to try to get more testers into the project. Maybe testers, as I say, that we haven't come across as matches. Maybe they've tested with other companies, and so we can then persuade them to transfer a copy of their DNA to family tree DNA, and we can then look at additional matches. It also allows us to group up the profiles. And so we've been able to group them mainly by location, by parish, and by townland, which is so important in a Northern Ireland situation. So we've got the 25 townlands that are in the parish of Islandmagee. And that really does help us when you're looking down at kind of surnames and so on, and you get particularly repeat forenames, as is often the case. You know, it is useful that we can potentially separate them out in townlands, and that helps us to separate out the various families. So it is really useful to get the information onto WikiTree. So, and also, sorry, I should have said as well, the grouping we use for the graveyards. We have categorized the profiles by graveyards. Then what we've been doing is you've got a list here of all of the surnames that we have found consistently through from the tithes to the Griffiths valuation through to the 1901 and 1911 census records. Now, there may well be also people that have lived in that period and just for whatever reason have not appeared on the records, but we are using those as a kind of firm foundation of surnames that have been present in essence in the 1800s in Islandmagee. We've listed all of those surnames, and then when we get a tester that has ancestry with that surname, we change it to bold. So where you see a name is in black bold, that means that we've got an autosomal tester representing that surname. But of recent times, we've also been doing a lot of Y testing. So where you see now the red in the surname, that means that we have also tested their Y DNA. So you can see there that we've got a pretty good representation, therefore, of the DNA, certainly through the 1800s in our project. Next slide. We've also then been adding photographs to WikiTree for the gravestones, and Alan Hindman, who's here today, has been doing a great job of going around the various 4 graveyards in Islandmagee, and he has photographed now completely 3 of those graveyards, and he's well into the 4th and I think largest graveyard. And then we have been putting those photographs onto WikiTree against the various profiles. And some of those photographs or some of those gravestones are already on Find a Grave, but for because they're copyrighted on Find a Grave, it's really useful that we can photograph them ourselves. We own the copyright, and we have no issues with copyright in placing those onto the WikiTree profiles. And you can see there that one of the advantages of WikiTree is you post one photograph, and then you can tag the various people that are in that grave into the image, and then that photograph appears on their individual profiles. We can also then analyze the actual each of the graveyards. We can look at how many people we have registered on WikiTree from that graveyard. It also links to a map of the graveyard, and there's various other advantages. Next slide, please. Just showing you an interesting example on how we can kind of get a little bit diverted from our main focus, which is Islandmagee. And if you look here at this particular situation, the second wife, who was Frances Arabella Alexander. So I was researching the Alexander family, and I found that she was married to someone who was originally from Northern Ireland, but had emigrated to Iowa, to Fairfield in Iowa. And so that was kind of interesting in a sense, but it took me to Iowa, and I was looking at the graveyard in Fairfield in Iowa, and I started to see these potential other wives of David Locke, but they were all surnames that I kind of recognized and said, right, that could potentially be from the north of Ireland. So to keep things short, basically what I found was that he had initially, as I say, he had emigrated. We think he was from Rulu, and basically he emigrated in 1849 with his family, but he decided that he wanted an Irish wife. So he came back. He was a blacksmith. He wasn't particularly well off, but he had a trade, a good trade. And so he came over. Now, whether he knew her before he went, and he married basically Isabella Blair in Killeed Presbyterian Church, took her back to Fairfield, and unfortunately she died. But she did leave a son, James. And then when she died, he decided that he wanted another Northern Ireland wife. So he came back to County Antrim, and this is where he decided to marry Frances or Fanny Alexander in Larne Methodist Church. He took her all the way to Fairfield in Iowa, and unfortunately then she also died early in life. So he decided the north of Ireland's a good place for wives. So he came back again, and he got Isabella McCrone, married her in Ballynear, took her back to Iowa, and then unfortunately she died. Came in later life, it was at this stage, back and found Ellen Blair, and married her in Belfast, and took her all the way back to Fairfield in Iowa. So you can see where massive connection with between County Antrim in all of its parts and the graveyard in Fairfield, Iowa, because now he didn't have many children by these wives. There's potentially 2, if not 3 children, but there's lots of gravestones that I was kind of delving around online in the old cemetery in Fairfield. Actually, since the presentation that we did in Larne, and Martin won't even know this, you can see that David Locke was the son of James Locke and Mary Laird, and someone has contacted me to say that she believes that Mary Laird is actually originally from Islandmagee and is linked to David Laird, who is one of our testers, which is going to be great when we follow that up to see if that is the case. So that is another line. So it just shows all the interconnections that there are between the various families. Next slide, please. And then because on the use of Wikitree, it allows us to put a narrative version of things. So it's not just the plain facts that you saw in the previous slide, but we can give the whole story of that kind of emigration story in the biography on Wikitree. So next slide, please. And for anyone then that wants to follow up on this, also on Wikitree, for every event that we possibly can, we also put the sources. So those are searchable, and you can see that we've got the various Irish genealogy links for the marriages, and we've also got find a grave links for deaths. So it's really good in terms of giving a full picture of the research that we're doing within the local projects.